Happy Easter, everyone. Well, this is an Easter like none before, I would imagine for you as well as for me. This year, I can say in our house there are no jelly beans, no marshmallow chicks, and no chocolate bunnies. Even more than that, there are no family gatherings this year, no gatherings of any kind, no religious gatherings, and it's a lot different. And I want to honor, too, that for some, I know there are thousands of people who are experiencing personal loss, and we want to honor that. And also to realize that many are experiencing also food and financial insecurity even more than normal. So while we hold that in mind, it's important for me to be grateful because I am not particularly negatively impacted, and I'm very blessed, and I know that. So I hold on to that because these days, however we're using them, are gifts, like every day. I think of hearing about the generosity and the caring that's going on in our greater community, the risking for us that's being done by our essential workers, and I'm so very appreciative of that. And so when I was thinking about this Easter, 2020, different than all the rest, I thought of an Itzhak Perlman story that I had heard a long time ago, but I wanted to share with you because I think it fits again. And Itzhak Perlman, the violin virtuoso. And this took place November 18th, 1995. And he was headed on stage to do a concert at Lincoln Center in New York City. Maybe that's why it came to mind right now. But anyways, if you've ever been to a Perlman concert, you know that getting on stage is no small feat for him because he was stricken with polio as a child. So he walks with the aid of 2 braces on his legs, and then he uses 2 crutches. So it takes him a while to get across the stage. And at this concert, he made his way across the stage. Someone described it, he majestically walks, but yet it looks like it may be painful. He got to a seat, sat, unlocked the braces so that he could bend 1 foot behind him and then put his other foot out front. He leaned over, picked up his violin, took a breath, nodded to the conductor, and they began. And then very shortly into the piece, not even a minute, all of a sudden there was this loud sound, sounds like a gunshot. If you've ever heard a violin string break, that was the sound. Everyone heard it. And the music stopped. And everyone was expecting that probably what he would do is he would then relock his braces, slowly walk across the stage, go get either a new violin or a new string or whatever it is they do when things like that happen. And people had that expectation that that's what would take place. So they kind of took a deep breath and sat down knowing that it was going to be a while before the concert continued. But it didn't happen that way. Instead, Itzhak closed his eyes, he paused, he took a deep breath, and he signaled for the conductor to begin again. And the orchestra began, and he began to play from where they had left off. And he played with more passion and more power and more purity than he ever had before. Now, anyone who knows anything about playing a violin knows that it's impossible to play a symphonic work with just 3 strings. But that night, Itzhak Perlman refused to know that. In fact, a woman who was in the audience wrote about the concert afterwards, and this is what she said. You could see him modulating, changing, recomposing the piece in his head. At one point, it sounded like he was detuning the strings to get sounds from them that they had never made before. When he finished, there was an awesome silence in the room, and the people rose and cheered. And there was an extraordinary outburst, of course, of applause from every corner of the auditorium. So we were on our feet screaming and cheering, doing everything we could to show how much appreciation we had for what he had done. He smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, raised his bow to quiet us, and then he said, not boasting, but in a quiet, pensive, reverent tone. You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can make with what you have left. I love that. Sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can make with what you have left. And I'm thinking our task right now is to find all the joy, all the love, all the passion we can with our lives as we have them left right now, because some of them have been constrained somewhat at this time. So finding the joy, and I've been seeing stories about this. On the news, there was a wonderful story of children who took sidewalk chalk, multicolored, and started painting the bricks on their house so their house would look like a rainbow. Nice parents allowed them to do that. I like that. Anyways, it got so popular with the people who were going on their walks past the house, the kids kept going. And then when they got to where they couldn't reach anymore, the parents got out ladders and they started chalking the brick in multicolors of their house for their children. I thought, how terrific. In my neighborhood, my neighbor, who was a grandma, I observed she was being picked up by her daughter. Then they were loading Easter baskets and so into the car. And my neighbor had a cloth mask on, and her daughter, who was picking her up, had a cloth mask on too, but her cloth mask was white, and she had attached a pink fuzzy nose to it and whiskers, and then she was wearing tall bunny earrings, or ears going up into the air. It was adorable. I thought, how wonderful, because when you looked at her, you didn't think, oh, protective mask. You thought, oh, isn't that fabulous? And so, hence, I tried to find the biggest Easter bonnet I could find to celebrate today as well, to get in the spirit of it. Because this Easter is is different. It has some of the old in it, and it's probably going to have some new in it. And our life is going to probably be like that going forward, while we are still in the midst of a pandemic and then beyond. That we'll have some of the old will come forward, but some of it will be gone. And of course, our invitation is to not resist. And I was thinking of the old Sodom and Gomorrah story, from Genesis, where the angel came to Lot and said, take your wife and daughter and get out of town, and get out as fast as you can, and whatever you do, don't ever look back. And of course, on the way out, Lot's wife looked back at the destruction that was happening, and she turned into a pillar of salt. I love that idea, because salt is it's a preservative, and also if you turn it into a pillar of salt, you're kind of stuck. You aren't going anywhere. And when we keep looking back to what was, we can get stuck. And so it's kind of a simple reminder to me that don't keep looking back. And that looking back might be about the job that you had that you may not have anymore. I understand that. It may be about the balance in your savings account or in your 401s and all that other stuff that may not be what it was before. Or it could be other things too. You could be looking back at past relationships, spouses. You could be looking back at your youth and going, well, that's not what it was now, what it was before. But we look at that fondly, but we look forward and keep moving. And that includes judgments. If you feel badly about some of the choices you made, we let it go and know that we can make new choices now. Because resurrection, which is what we're celebrating here on Easter Sunday, isn't it? Metaphysically, to me, means the power to overcome, to be reborn, to renew, to move forward. And whether that's in your health, your peace of mind, your finances, your relationships, whatever it is, it's like if you have been ill and you become healthy, that is the resurrection. That is that life energy flowing through you, healing your body. It's a raise in consciousness, isn't it? And if you were concerned about financial challenges, when you raise your consciousness to an understanding that our source is God, godness, divinity, great mystery, whatever you want to call it, and not your bank account, That's raising your consciousness. That's a resurrection, a raising of our thinking. The resurrection principle says that the power of life, which is eternal, is stronger than anything. I like that. Because without that principle, every time we saw a leaf fall off a tree in the fall, we go, oh my gosh, the tree's about done. No, it's not. It's just transforming. And every time we saw a petal fall off a flower, we go, oh my gosh, the plant's almost done for. And every time we cut our finger or skinned our knee, which was kind of my regular stance when I was younger and hopefully less frequent now, but not gone totally. It does not mean that my life span is being shortened. No, because I resurrect beyond that. My body has that eternal life energy in it that heals. Every time we have a sorrow or a disappointment, that doesn't mean over the long term that it diminishes our hope and our resiliency. In fact, many times it does just the opposite when we have a resurrection in thinking and raise our consciousness. Ernest Holmes, wonderful New Thought author, wrote in Science of Mind, the resurrection is the death of the belief that we are separated from God. It's the death of the belief that we're separated from God. I like that. Charles Fillmore, who's the co-founder of Unity, wrote in The Revealing Word, Easter is the awakening and raising to spiritual consciousness of the I am in man, which has been buried in the tomb of materiality. Easter is the awakening to spiritual consciousness. It's raising how we see things. It's rising up in consciousness, isn't it? It's where we contemplate the depth of our divine potential, where we realize how amazing we are. We let our light shine, and we've got our way shower, which was Jesus, who did just that. He was very audacious, was he not? He was bold. He was what you call ahead of his time for the people that he was hanging out with. He was a feminist before they were feminists. He was true to himself and what he knew, and he lived from that. And of course, he said things like, even greater things you will do. And I don't think he was just being polite. He meant it. He was inviting us to come into the realization that we are, as he is, these amazing divine beings. And he said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And for me, what that means is he came to show us how to live from that fullness, that understanding of the truth of who we are. And sometimes that can be a challenge, because we all have these wonderful gifts, don't we, that we use. It may be that we're the most fabulous parent in the world. It may be that we're a great musician like Itzhak Perlman. Whatever it is that your gift is, that you are here to express and to share with the world. It's unique from everybody else. And sometimes, I was influenced early in my life by others. I was pretty easily influenced, and that's okay. And I remember when I was 17, and actually I was in a beauty contest, Miss St. Louis Park, as were many of my friends. And for one of the first event they had one evening was where each contestant got up and spoke. They asked her a question or something. I don't even remember what the question was, but I remember I got up and spoke. And I was really quite eloquent. I talked about, I still remember it, and it's a while ago. It was about, I said we should reallocate our resources, both human and financial. And then I went on and on. And it was really quite good. And this was it was at the height of the Vietnam War. So it was quite poignant. And after the question and answer, when that was all over, a couple of the officials came up and congratulated me and said, well, that was very good. We were quite impressed with you. And I was like, woo, this is good. And then a little bit later, one of my friends who was also in the contest came up and said, and I don't remember exactly what her words were, but the content I took to heart, which was, you were a little too much, a little too confident. I don't think we'll like you quite as much if you're like that. I took it to heart. And so the next time they asked us some more, we did some more public speaking, and I remember I shrunk intentionally. I hemmed and hawed and tried to be a little less certain. Now that was a good lesson because I learned from that. And years going forward, when people would volunteer to critique my speaking without me even asking, it's kind of interesting. And I remember one person said to me, he said, you know, you should never use humor because you're talking about very serious subjects. And by then I knew to pause and not just take in that information. I knew to say, is that true for me? It may be true for them, but for me, what I'm to be about doing, not so. And then someone else came up to me a few years later and said, you know, we really think you should speak more like this guy. That would be so much better. We would appreciate that. And I thought, that guy's really good. But he's already there. He already exists. He does what he does. I don't need to, why would there be duplication? Why would I be another him? I just get to be me. And so I learned from that. And so, you know, it's like when we discover whatever it is that we are to be about here on this planet doing, it's like to be bold and to step forward courageously and be about whatever that is. You know, our invitation is to boldly follow Jesus' example, not so much to worship him, you know, because the thing is, it's easier to worship somebody than it is to raise your consciousness and live from that, isn't it? It really is. But I don't think that's what we're here for. So, I always like to share this story at this time of year, and I think it's fitting. And it's from Illusions by Richard Bach, and it's the fable or the story that leads off the book. And I'll share it with you. It says, once there lived a village of creatures along the bottom of a great crystal river. The current of the river swept silently over them all, young and old, rich and poor, good and evil. The current going its own way, knowing only its own crystal self. Each creature in its own manner clung tightly to the twigs and rocks of the bottom of the river, for clinging was their way of life, and resisting the current, what each had learned from birth. But one creature said at last, I'm tired of clinging. Though I cannot see it with my eyes, I trust that the current knows where it is going. I shall let go and let it take me where it will. Clinging, I shall die of boredom. The other creatures laughed and said, Fool, let go and that current you worship will throw you humbled and smashed across the rocks, and you will die quicker than boredom. But the one heeded them not, and taking a breath did let go, and at once was tumbled and smashed by the current across the rocks. Yet in time, as the creature refused to cling again, the current lifted him free from the bottom, and he was bruised and hurt no more. And the creatures downstream, to whom he was a stranger, cried, See a miracle! A creature like ourselves, yet he flies. See the Messiah come to save us all. And the one carried in the current said, I am no more a Messiah than you. The river delights to lift us free, if only we dare let go. Our true work is this journey, this adventure. But they cried the more, Savior, all the while clinging to the rocks. And when they looked again, he was gone, and they were left alone making legends about a Messiah. I love that story. And I was thinking about it because, of course, we're talking about downstream when talks about the current, of course. What is the current? The current, of course, is the divine God, whatever it is, that flows over everybody, provides us with everything. And then we resist it. It said, you know, from birth they learn to cling to the bottom, to cling to the twigs. And I can see that. It's sort of like I grow up and I become more and more cautious in how I live my life and less trusting. And so then we're invited, like the trusting one, to let go, to go into the flow and believe that what happens will be for our good. Um, and of course, I love the story that he then goes downstream, of course, and the others are looking at him floating free and thinking that can't be us. That must be something different than us. Therefore, it's a Messiah, and they made legends about a Messiah. Because my guess is Jesus didn't come here to be a legend. He came to be a way shower. He came to be an example of what is also can be true for us as we resurrect our consciousness and raise it from the human focus into incorporating in our own spiritual understanding of the divinity that we are. In modern times, a mystic from India, Sai Baba, he's wonderful. Was able to manifest solid form from the formless. And people who were near him experienced healings. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? A lot like Jesus. But a Western reporter once interviewed him and said, "Are you God?" And Sai Baba said, "Yes, I am." And the people around him were a little stunned. And then he went on to say, "And so are you. The only difference between you and me is that I know it and you doubt it." I like that. The difference between Jesus and us is he knew who he was, and we can doubt it. So, as we're doing Easter this year a little bit different, and I must admit that 2 months ago I thought that social distancing had to do with kind of moving away from people you had nothing in common with. I did not have the new definition, which is using it because you care so much. And quite honestly, I thought flattening the curve meant wearing a minimizer bra. But we've changed. We're evolving. Things are coming up now. So I'd like to close out with what Eric Butterworth said. And he's a wonderful unity minister. And he said, "The open tomb of Easter morning says to you, you can become what you innately are. And this innateness of you far transcends anything you've ever conceived of yourself in your wildest flights of fancy. There is within you a person of stature, of genius, of mastery, struggling to be released. And if you get into the spirit of Easter and let it happen to you, you can believe that every stone of limitation will be rolled away from your tomb." So my invitation for myself and for you this Easter is that we step into being the audacious person of stature and genius and mastery that we truly are. And that as we do that, we will experience an amazing, maybe yet different, but an amazing Easter. Happy Easter to you all. I love you, and so it is.